Joining me now is France 24's Valerie Dekimpe, who's covering the summit. Valerie, there's a lot of pessimism going into this event, but what needs to happen in order for this summit to be declared a success?
Well, there's a consensus here in Glasgow that COP26, at the end of this summit, we won't have a big agreement, a big breakthrough moment in the same way that the Paris Agreement was a major breakthrough moment for countries to celebrate back in 2015. COP26 will be about getting as many commitments by countries that will help the world keep global warming below 1.5 degrees. So if countries are able to negotiate in a constructive manner, that's already going to be a major step forward, bearing in mind that there are concerns that the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic, there are existing tensions that could really have a major impact on the negotiations. For COP26 to be a success, we will need to see countries setting a clear path forward for 2030 with concrete plans for CO2 reductions. We have heard countries put forward plans, but now we need to know exactly how they think they're going to get there. That's going to be crucial for COP26 to be a success. A potential global deal to limit methane emissions would also be a major victory. The US and the EU have agreed to reduce methane emissions, another major greenhouse gas, by 30%. What if that could be expanded into a global deal? If 190 nations, more than 190 nations, agree on a similar target, that would be a major victory. Other concrete measures aiming to phase out fossil fuels, coal in particular, to put an end to subsidies for fossil fuels, that would also be a major step forward. And you've guessed it, climate finance, of course, will be a major topic of debate here in Glasgow. We know that countries agreed to provide more than $100 billion every year for poorer countries for climate adaptation to help them cope with the consequences of climate change. We know that we are 20 billion short, and if countries are willing to put more money on the table, that would also be a major achievement for developing countries.
Now, the French President Emmanuel Macron is expected to address world leaders later this Monday. What role can France actually play in these negotiations?
Well, France has tried to position itself as a climate leader on the international stage, and the French delegation is saying that they think that their role at COP26 will be that of a facilitator of bringing the North and the South together, building trust between countries, especially in the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic, and the role of the guardian of the Paris Agreement. The problem, though, is that there is a real gap between how France is being perceived abroad and how the government is being perceived at home by the French public. The French state was recently found guilty by a court in France of not doing enough to honor its climate commitments. The state also needs to pay a huge fine for exceeding its pollution limits. So clearly at home, France is being seen as a climate laggard, and on the international stage, perhaps as a climate leader. We spoke to Jennifer Morgan, the executive director of Greenpeace International, and this is what she had to say about the role that France could play during the negotiations here in Glasgow.
I think President Macron can come here and learn from the most vulnerable countries about what it's like to be on the front line, and listen to them, to bring both support to them for their own impacts, but also to commit to really putting in place the laws in France that are needed to go to zero emissions sustainably.
Emmanuel Macron is expected to give a speech later today as part of the national announcements made by heads of states here, and he's not expected to put anything new on the table. He will simply reaffirm France's existing NDC, nationally determined contribution, and that is reducing greenhouse gas emissions by 40% by 2030. He's only going to reaffirm that objective. Some have even said that Emmanuel Macron's presence here in Glasgow is not necessarily a sign that France is fully engaged in a climate diplomacy, but this is part of Macron's strategy as the country gears up for a presidential election next year. The last time that Emmanuel Macron attended a climate summit was in 2017 in Bonn, and we know that at home during that presidential election, the Greens are expected to make considerable gains, and Emmanuel Macron cannot afford to lose more ground. He really needs to buff his green credentials, and being here at COP26 might be one way to do that.
Valerie Dekimpe, our environment editor, reporting there from Glasgow. Thank you, Valerie. And Valerie and her team will be keeping us updated on that event throughout the course of the day.